And so today I'd like to start by talking about Liam's piece Overlooking. And in the program note, you mentioned how the title has a kind of dual meaning, both in the way you wrote the piece, but also what the piece is about. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. I think the first thing that's worth mentioning is this piece sort of came at a time for me when I was trying out many new ways of composing. And this was really, this piece, Overlooking, was the first time that I sort of experimented with planning out the form of the piece before I wrote any of it. So I actually took a piece of paper and wrote sort of, here's the arc of the piece, here's what happens where, roughly. Um, and that was so clarifying for me because, without actually getting into the technical aspects of composing, I sort of saw the greater scope of what I wanted the piece to do. And so that was, I mean, that was sort of an aha moment for me. I was like, yes, I'm onto something. I really felt like composing was more natural in this piece because of that. And so, as I was thinking about it, I sort of thought, well, I'm overlooking this musical universe. I have this perspective on it. It's seeing everything from the big picture before considering the smaller details. So that was sort of the secret personal meaning to the title Overlooking. That was the first meaning. But as I was composing the piece, I was very much thinking about other definitions of the word overlooking, one of which is sort of overlooking as neglect, as failure to see something or to notice something, as sort of a disregard for the effects of our actions. And of course, I mean, as I was writing that piece, and and ever since, really, I've just been, keeping up with current events is really a tragic thing. Just hit over and over and over again by these horrible stories. And the one that I was specifically thinking about when I was writing this piece was just the horrifying gravity of the climate crisis. Because new information had just been released that was really more dire than anything that we'd ever seen before. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that that really felt it fit into the definition of the second definition of overlooking I was considering. But at the same time, and maybe this is a bit of a digression, but I felt very hesitant and trepidatious to be too explicit in discussions of that. And this is something I've thought a lot about lately because I in terms of art as activism and its potential in that respect, because obviously I care very deeply about these issues, and they're things that are so much in my mind all the time and in the minds of so many other people. But in a very real way, like writing this piece of music isn't going to do anything to help solve the climate crisis in the most literal sense, at least in the way that I was collaborating and writing the piece and publishing it and producing it. I mean, it's probably, when you consider all the rehearsals and the filming and whatever, it's contributing to carbon emissions way more than it is, diminishing them. So that entitling the piece Overlooking was my way of subtly alluding to all of those things that were in my head.
Yes, well, it's a like a whole world you're thinking of, but also overseeing this piece, which if you're not familiar with it in our audience, it's a piece for piano and percussion for just two players, but it's 25 minutes long, very substantial work. So with managing that much of time and almost a half an hour, um, keeping track of all the large scale and the local level of the form and the structure is very important. And so thinking about the climate change and also the structure, I know that you've structured the piece in a few movements that are related to different elements, and I wonder if you share about that level.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Um, well, I guess to give a little bit of context to explain that, I I think it's important to know that I wrote this piece for two specific people, for two friends. And there's a really fun story about how it came to be. But I was thinking about the qualities that I thought made their playing so special. Some of Glenn, the percussionist, playing feels so icy and so cold and so distant in the most like piercing, ethereal way. And then some of Adrian's playing, Adrian, the wonderful pianist, it feels like you're sort of soaring above everything else. It feels like sky. And so I was thinking of these elements, and then I was thinking of, the four classical elements of the earth, and then I sort of took some personal license there. And so I entitled the movements Dirt, Ice, Sky, and Void, thinking about these four natural qualities that I saw in their playing, but also that are very much being, manipulated and affected by the climate crisis and our actions on our planet. And so there, again, this piece is full of sort of dual meanings, and that was one of them. But really, I think maybe the most important thing about this piece is just what a personal collaborative process it was, and that the fact that all the things that I just mentioned we were talking about as collaborators, and that it was such a homegrown project, and we brought it all together in a way that so that we could take those things and express them publicly. And so that's where the movement titles came from. That's where the title of the piece came from. That's where the whole idea came from. So it was such a collaborative effort.
So you're both thinking of the piece on a very large scale view. Was that process of how you thought about it on the large scale, that collaborative with the other artists?
Um, well, this is funny. I guess in a very, very literal way, absolutely. Because when they asked me to write them a piece, I had no clue they were going to ask for a 20 or 25-minute piece. I thought it was going to be 5 or 7 minutes. And actually, I met these two wonderful musicians, Glenn and Adrian, at a young musicians program. It's called National Young Arts Week. And it was virtual that year. So we really didn't know each other at all. We met on Zoom. We really hit it off during this week. And by the end of it, they had asked me to write a piece, which was very, very touching, and I was so thrilled about it. But of course, I didn't think it was going to be a 25-minute piece, and so their ideas definitely did contribute to that, because of course, if somebody says they want a 25-minute piece, I really wanted to get inside their heads and try to understand what, maybe at the most basic level, what they wanted to unfold through that long duration. So yeah, in fact, I remember, well, Glenn is in Texas, Adrian is in California, I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, is where I was based at the time. And we spent hours and hours and hours on Zoom talking about how they could interpret what I'd written. And so just as I'd drawn out sort of form graphs to conceptualize the scale of the piece, they drew out their own just to show me, this is what I think of it. This is how I imagine it. And in a lot of ways it was similar. In some ways it was actually quite different in really interesting ways. So I mean, yeah, of course, that made me think about how form is not a compositional thing. It's a performance-based thing too. And it's a very collaborative thing.
Absolutely. Well, that's very wonderful to hear about. I'm wondering, for our audiences, thinking about the two instruments of piano and percussion, which are in essence, the piano is a percussive instrument where every key is attached to a hammer, which hits a string. In your piece, you have moments where you kind of blend the two together, where you're not quite sure who is playing or they're playing at the same time. At one point, you have the pianist actually play a gong. And so I'm wondering how you were thinking about these two instruments that are, well, the percussionist is actually playing many instruments,
Right.
but wondering how you thought about this pairing sonically.
Yeah. Well, I definitely thought about it a lot and had to think about it a lot, because there were just so many instruments involved. And again, my collaborator Glenn, the percussionist, was so wonderful in helping me out, because I hadn't written a percussion work of that scale in terms of quantity of instruments at that point. And I mean, for me, writing for percussion is just so exciting, because when I think about all the instruments and where they are and how people are going to play them, it allows me to sort of like visualize what it's going to be like in the hall, watching them play it. And for me, like just sort of setting myself down in that place, really imagining how it's going to come across, how the music is going to speak, is I think the way that I write the best music that I can write. And with percussion, that's so literal because I can like sort of imagine here's the vibraphone, here's the marimba, here's, you know, the drums, whatever. Um, and so I just sort of I lay that all out and I thought, yeah, well, I guess a natural question is like, where is everything going to be? Um, and then I started thinking about the specific sort of sounds and timbres that I was going for. And one that I really, really wanted was this low rumbling sound in the piano. And I knew that probably a good way to do that was to ask Glenn to play tremolo on the lowest piano strings with these soft wool mallets. But I didn't want that to be the only thing um, playing at that moment. And Adrian couldn't really play it because of his position behind the piano. So I thought, you know what? We've already learned so much doing this project, and they've already been so flexible and learned so many new techniques and things. Surely Adrian wouldn't mind becoming a percussionist for a little while. And it was really great. I mean, I was so impressed. They sounded just as good reversing roles as they did in the instruments they've spent um, years learning. But I guess that sort of flexibility is something that is really lovely to have as a composer when you can throw all these curveballs at the performers, and they're just so willing to do it. I mean, that's one of the things I love most about the new music community is everybody's just like, yeah, we'll make it work.
Yeah, and you've got a really terrific performance of this piece too.
Yeah.
Well, I guess taking a quite big step back, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit how you started getting interested in writing music. You had said that it was at this point that you first started seeing your work and its planning and the overall view, and I wonder how you first started composing, ways that you
Mhm.
was it more an idea to an idea, or how did you think about it?
Yeah. For me, for a long time, composing was improvising. That's really how I started out. When I was really young, actually, and I was probably like 4 or 5, and a piano was moved into my house, and I was just kind of awestruck by it, and I was so fascinated by it, and I was just sort of glued to it for for a long time after that. And I just improvised and improvised, and started to find these sounds that I liked and these patterns that I liked. Um, but it took a while for me to start thinking about form and structure in, I guess, a more intentional way. So then I started writing the ideas down a little bit. I didn't start sort of planning out the arc of a piece until much later with Overlooking. But that was a slow evolution for me, and it was something that um, I guess over time I started to realize that as I was getting more comfortable improvising and making improvised pieces, I was already thinking about form in my head. So why not write it down on the page? And at that point, my wonderful mother, who had taken music lessons in college, helped me to write down some of my ideas, and I sort of then learned how to read and write music myself, and it just sort of took off from there.
That's wonderful. Well, I wanted to open it up if there are any questions from the audience here. We have a question. What are you working on now?
Ooh, that's a great question. Right now I'm working on a lot, maybe a little bit too much actually, because I'm very excited that next summer I have the chance to attend the Aspen Music Festival in school. So I just realized I have a lot of music to write for next summer, on top of a couple of other projects I'd already been working on um, for this semester at school. So I've just started working on an orchestra piece for that. Um, and I have been definitely planning it all out on paper. I've got it somewhere over here, but um, that's been really fun. And then after that, I have a piece for um, Pierrot ensemble, for chamber ensemble, that'll also be for Aspen. And actually, another project that I'm working on right now is a solo piano piece for, well, for piano and electronics. That's just a toccata that I was encouraged to write as part of this music technology class I took at school this fall. And the professor has worked really hard to put together a concert of a lot of pieces that we wrote in that class. And one of these was this piano and electronics piece that's sort of dealing with these two very polarized forces that are trying to conquer each other for the whole duration of the piece. And that's like the acoustic instrument and then these big surround sound speakers that can play anything as loud as you want. So that's been a new exploration for me for sure. But I'm just very, very grateful to be able to write music and for people, and to just keep trying new things and experimenting with the sounds I love. And yeah, I'm just really excited for the future.
Well, it's exciting to hear these pieces. And you're at Juilliard right now?
Yeah, I'm at Juilliard. I'm in my second year undergrad studying with John Curliano, who has definitely been, it's such a inspiring mentor for me. So I'm very happy. I just, want to keep pushing myself and writing the best music I can.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the residency at Aspen this summer. I remember that being a very formative experience for me, and it's such a beautiful place and great performances, and you'll meet friends there that you'll have for a very long time.
Mm. I'm really excited. Yeah, it seems like such a dream, and also just such a beautiful place. And I love the outdoors too, so I'm sure I'll be really thrilled with that.
Yes, lots of good hikes over there. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and please tune in again next time.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.